Federalism is the word we use to describe the balancing and sharing of powers between two levels of government, the United States national government and the state governments. Finding a proper balance between these levels was perhaps the most urgent task the framers of the Constitution needed to solve. As we've noted, the central government under the Articles was severely weak. The delegates at the Constitutional Convention saw a clear need to increase its powers by giving it the power to tax, the power to regulate interstate commerce, and the power to create a more organized, reliable military that could be commanded and paid by the national government directly. The core of the problem was how to distribute powers between the central government and the states. The system the framers created was a new invention in political science, unlike anything Europeans had done. As Justice Anthony Kennedy wrote, "Federalism was our nation's own discovery. The framers split the atom of sovereignty. It was the genius of their idea that our citizens would have two political capacities, one state and one federal." There are three parts of the Constitution in particular that set up our system of federalism. Now, this is the first time we've referenced the Constitution. In We the People, we get to know the Constitution inside and out. In fact, by the end, you'll be taking a Constitution test in which you should have at least a basic idea of what every section of the document does. When we mention parts of the Constitution in these lectures, here's what I expect. Take out your pocket Constitution you were given in class, find the relevant section, and mark or annotate or highlight it in some way. The more you look back at the original document, the better you'll understand how all the pieces fit together. Article 1, Section 8 lists the powers of the national government. The 10th Amendment states that all other powers, those not listed, belong to the states. And Article 6 states that if federal law and state law should conflict, federal law is supreme. We'll talk about each of these in more detail now. A second ago I said the founders invented the modern idea of federalism. The principle they invented was that you could have two overlapping governments in the same geographic area if their responsibilities were divided up by subject matter. The idea was that the national government would be responsible for a select list of powers, such as the armed forces, coining money, and interstate commerce, and then the states were left in charge of everything else. James Madison explained the idea in the following way. The powers delegated by the proposed Constitution to the federal government are few and defined. Those which are to remain in the state governments are numerous and indefinite. The former will be exercised principally on external objects such as war, peace, negotiation, and foreign commerce. The powers of the federal government are called enumerated powers. To enumerate means to write things down in a list. This list is located in the Constitution in Article 1, Section 8. If you look at Article 1, Section 8, you will find 18 specific powers of the national government written out. There are a few more powers scattered through the rest of the Constitution, and more have been added via amendments, but Article 1, Section 8 remains the main list. Of these 18 powers, 3 in particular stand out. They are the Taxing and Spending Clause. This allows the national government to raise revenue and spend it on nearly anything. This power is the legal source for infrastructure projects like the interstate highway system and huge social welfare programs like Medicare and Social Security. The Interstate Commerce Clause allows the national government to regulate the economy. The last clause, the Necessary and Proper Clause, gives the national government any other powers that may be necessary and proper for carrying out the first 17 powers. If you think this sounds broad and vague, you are correct. All powers not granted to the national government are reserved to the states. This was already implied by the original Constitution, but it wasn't actually spelled out until the 10th Amendment, which states the powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution are reserved to the states respectively, or to the people. Courts have basically concluded that the 10th Amendment adds nothing new to the Constitution. It simply clarifies a principle that was already there in the original. The 10th Amendment means that wherever the Commerce Clause or the Taxing Clause or some national power ends, that's where state power begins. So there aren't really court cases about the 10th Amendment. They would instead be court cases about, say, the scope of the Commerce Clause. Article 6 contains the Supremacy Clause. This Constitution and the laws of the United States, which shall be made in pursuance thereof, shall be the supreme law of the land. anything in the Constitution or laws of any state to the contrary notwithstanding. In short, if national and state laws should conflict, national law is supreme. Originally, some delegates at the Constitutional Convention had pushed for an even stronger version of the Supremacy Clause. James Madison proposed giving the National Congress a federal negative over any state laws. This was functionally a federal veto power over any state law. However, this idea went too far for the majority of delegates. It was voted down, and the weaker Supremacy Clause was created as a compromise instead. One consequence of the Supremacy Clause is that in some policy areas, the national government can override state laws in whole fields of policy. We call this idea preemption. You may have noticed that some laws are uniform across the whole country with no difference between states. For example, if you look at nutritional labels for foods, they're the same in every grocery store in the country. This is an area where the national government occupies the field completely, and states have no role to play. California could not try to pass special California nutrition labels if it wanted to. It is preempted by national law. Here's some more examples. Laws about prescription drug approval. All drug approvals run through the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration. It is not a state-by-state decision. Here's another. Almost anything having to do with air travel, airline regulation, air safety, it's all preempted by the national government with no role for the states. The reason the national government is able to do this is because of the Interstate Commerce Clause and the Supremacy Clause combined. Things like drugs and airlines are part of the national economy. So if Congress wants to preempt states from passing their own regulations and occupy the field by itself, Congress is able to do that. With this basic framework in place, in the next lecture we'll look at some advantages and disadvantages of American federalism.